Hello, everybody. Artish and Finesse with you on a Wednesday night, middle of the summer. Finesse, how's it going? Haven't talked to you in a while.
It's good. It's hard to get too emotionally invested in anything right now, especially sports-wise. The Pirates are playing, but they play every day. You can't get too worked up about a single game. I haven't watched a game all year. I think the only thing I'm fired up about really is the Penguins' recent signings. But even that, I'm not that fired up about because we sort of saw these two recent signings coming, and there was unfortunately nothing we could do to stop it.
Well, aren't you pleased? I mean, I feel like if we knew Sutter was going to get signed. Aren't you pleased that it's not for much term and probably for less annual salary than we thought it was going to be?
Well, I'm displeased that the Penguins signed him at all. But I'm pleased, or sort of less displeased, about the signing than I would otherwise have been had it been a longer, more expensive commitment. I think the best thing I could say about the Sutter contract is that it is very tradable. It's a very tradable contract. But I don't think the Pens are interested in trading him. I think they want to keep him. I think that $3.3 million is about what the Penguins should be paying a third-line center right now. I just think he's the wrong third-line center. So I don't even really have a problem with the cost. I have a problem with the player. I just don't think he's a good enough player. But we'll see.
I know you don't like him, but let me play devil's advocate for a second. First of all, I'm on record as saying that I would have been fine with Marcel Gottsch being the third-line center, giving a guy like Adam Payerl a chance on the fourth line, and using that cap space elsewhere. But this was sort of a fait accompli. We knew this was going to happen. But let me just play devil's advocate. Isn't it entirely possible that Brandon Sutter will quickly outperform his contract, and before you know it, everybody's going to be thinking, not only is he a guy that you could rationalize trading for, but you really want to trade for him because he's outperforming his contract. And as a benchmark, I would just point to Derek Brassard, who the Rangers just signed to a $5 million a year contract. And if you look at Derek Brassard's stats, before last year, I mean, he's only been in the league a few years. Before last year, his career high was 18 points in a season. And last year he had 45 points, 18 goals. Aren't those completely attainable numbers for Brandon Sutter now that he has some decent line mates?
Well, I mean, if Sutter is outperforming his contract, I don't know why we'd want to trade him.
Well, I mean, he had 26 points last year. And he's got, and he has no edge to his game.
Well, that's the problem. Like, I just don't think there are certain guys where, like, you can look at their, paper statistics, their points, and their, all the possession statistics and all that stuff, and, like, you can make a pretty reasonable judgment about it. Like, Sutter's points and possession numbers are bad, but then when you just watch him, like, that's my biggest issue with him is he doesn't have an impact on the game. He's so, like, just average when he's out there, and he doesn't.
He's soft.
He's soft and he's irrelevant most shifts. And I just think, like, you need, the good teams, the teams that get far in the playoffs, the teams that have that playoff success, they have identities on their third and fourth line. And he doesn't have. What is his identity? What other teams think about Brandon Sutter? Like, does anyone on another team ever talk about him? Do other coaches watch film on him? I don't think that anyone gets annoyed with him. I don't think that anyone worries about where he is on the ice. And, like, so he could come and score 16 goals or something this year. But that's not what I'm going to judge him by. Like, I want to see him have an impact. I want to see the third line have an identity with him. I want to see him, like, mixing it up a little bit. And I'm not saying be dirty or fight. I'm just saying, play with a little bit of edge.
Yeah. Well, what do you think about his new presumed line mates, Nick Spaling and Steve Downey. We know about Downey.
Downey is fine. Downey I like. I like Downey. I don't know Nick Spaling or Spaling. I don't even know how you pronounce it.
I don't know how you pronounce it. I've never seen the guy play. I have no idea. All I know is this about Nick Spaling. I don't even need to look at his possession numbers, which I understand are just as bad, if not worse, than Brandon Sutter's. I just know that when you have an opportunity to reconstruct your roster, you don't pay a guy that is described by anyone who watches Nashville as a borderline bottom six guy. You don't pay a guy like that over $2 million. You just don't do it.
Well, before you even get to that, you don't trade James Neal for that guy.
That goes without saying. But you knew the guy made 1.5 last season?
Yeah.
1.3. You knew he was going to get this kind of a raise. If you're paying Brandon Sutter $3.3 million for scoring 26 points, you're probably going to pay a versatile guy like Spaling, who's coming off a career season where he scored 13 goals. He can play up and down the lineup ostensibly. You're going to end up paying him at least $2. You have to be thinking that way. And I just don't understand the thought process there. You see all these guys that signed around the league for $1 million at the tail end of free agency. There were a lot of guys that signed for $1 million, bargain basement prices that you could plug in there that, I think that would be just as serviceable. Why are you wasting that cap space?
Well, that's the real curious thing about the James Neal trade is like whatever you think about Hornquist, and I'm sure he's a good player. It's like the fact that you would use Neal, you want to use Neal to build your depth, but the fact that you would do it for a guy with whose contract is uncertain was a little bit strange, right?
Totally bizarre. I would have rather.
Wouldn't you rather get Ideally, you get a guy who has 2 years left at $900K each year, right? With Hornquist, something like that, like a first round pick from 2012 or 2011 or something. I don't know. I don't know Spaling. I mean, I can't say anything about him. I've never seen him play.
I'm happy reserving judgment on the Hornquist element of the deal because he could elevate his performance considerably on the line with Sid or Gino. He's been playing in Nashville for crying out loud.
Yeah, he could be. He could score 30 goals. It wouldn't surprise me, but I just don't know. Like, I think if we're evaluating that trade, like, is Hornquist going to give you something you wouldn't have gotten from James Neal had you just kept James Neal?
Well, he may be a little bit more of a net front presence. I'm not sure. I mean, that's the way he's described. It doesn't. You want to change it up and go with Hornquist. That's fine, but I'll reserve judgment. I am not reserving judgment on the Spaling or Spaling element of this deal.
So you could have had Neal and a $1.45 million winger for the same that you're getting Hornquist and Spaling.
True.
And there's a lot, like you just pointed out, there's a lot of guys who signed for around $1 million who probably would have been preferable to paying Nick Spaling $2.2 million.
Yeah, I mean, it's just apparent to me that they were intent on getting rid of Neal. It seems like they were going to trade him come hell or high water. And that's fine. I mean, that's a perfectly valid determination in my view because the guy he had some issues. It seems like the higher-ups didn't like him. He was a bit of a loose cannon. We complained about him all the time. We didn't like him.
Now he's really unlikable.
Very unlikable. At the same time, we appreciated his talent. I mean, we didn't like him. So they probably didn't like him either. If you want to make a move, I get that. But it has to make sense on every level. And I don't think it really does.
No. So, you have, it's like, the Pens made those the two big signings recently are Spaling and Sutter. And I can't think of like two people who are sort of less exciting to have just signed to a team.
I agree.
Like, is anybody going out and buying a Nick Spaling jersey?
I don't think so. I don't think anybody knows anything about Nick Spaulding.
Right, like these people putting together these spreadsheets and these charts about Nick Spaulding, it's like, can you honestly say that you watched and paid any attention to Nashville's third line? Like you didn't, and so that's why I just ignore all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't know. I don't know about that, but I agree it's not exciting. I would have been more excited to just clear Sutter and Spaulding off the books and sign a couple of these free agents that were floating around, like, David Booth and Daniel Winnick and, these guys that signed for $1 million a year. Just go. You could have gone bargain basement and had a massive upgrade on our bottom six.
Yeah, and that's why, like, when I'm talking about the Sutter contract, like, I'm not arguing that like, he specifically is overpaid. Like, I understand that that's what the market is valuing Brandon Sutter at. I get that. I'm saying that the goal of a team is to beat the market. You're supposed to be smarter than the market.
Absolutely.
And so I think you could get the same production for like $1 to $2 million or $2.5 million or something from somebody else. And I just think committing to him is a little bit of a mistake, but it's not the worst contract in the world. I mean, it's not like they sign him to some mega 6-year deal. It's 2 years, and it's cheap enough that he can be traded, and it's short enough that even if he continues to perform at the level he did last year, people will still sort of view him as a guy who potentially has upside. Like, he won't have sort of – I don't know that the bloom will be completely off the rose even after this coming season if he has another relatively bad year.
Isn't it so interesting the way the NHL just doesn't operate like the NBA, even though they're both salary cap leagues? Like, you always hear about NBA teams maneuvering to clear cap space. You don't really hear about that in hockey. Like, what's wrong with clearing some cap space this summer to position yourself to trade for, a really high-end player like Evander Kane? You just don't hear about that kind of stuff happening in hockey.
Yeah, well, I think the cap space thing in the NBA, it's all about, you have one guy, specific, like 1 or 2 guy targets.
And obviously there are less guys that need to.
And those guys hit those guys can hit the market in the NBA. And the NHL, it's just those top guys haven't really been hitting the market recently.
True, but I'm wondering if that's not going to change because I see a pattern developing in free agency where the beginning of free agency, there are crazy signings for enormous amounts of money and big cap hits. And then the last couple of years, we've seen, as the summer drags on, guys signing, really low prices, $1 million cap hits. Would it make sense to sort of just design your bottom six to just be all, $1 million or less guys and,
well, that's sort of isn't that what we did last year? They just weren't the right guys.
Well, I think we did it, but I think, I'm not sure we had a lot of cap space to play with. I don't think we had any cap space to play with. I'm saying, like a year like this one, we had an opportunity where we're going to trade Neal to really leave ourselves a little bit of a cushion. I feel like we always go into the season with no more than $1 million in cap space. I'm talking about, leave yourself $5 million in cap space. What's wrong with that? I think the opportunity was there for the Penguins to really give themselves a cushion, and there are guys that, are probably going to be moved at some point, like King, or, other people, from teams that are a little bit tight against the cap.
Yeah, I think the idea is that you can sort of always do that later, with the prorated stuff, and you can always sort of try to fit somebody in later.
Yeah, but we always talk about that, though. Waiting until the trade deadline in the NHL, Marian Gaborik being the exception to the rule, usually doesn't work.
Yeah, I actually don't want the huge splash deal necessarily every trade deadline, especially the one. I mean, I think maybe I'm a little bit poisoned because of the 2013 one because there just wasn't enough time to integrate those guys, Iginla and Morrow and everybody.
Right.
But Yeah, I don't think you can rely on the trade deadline necessarily. So you want to have a team early on that's up to snuff. And I do think, for all the shit we're given about not liking Spalling and Sutter, I do think the Penguins are better today than we were at the end of last season. Not because of the Neal trade. I actually think that was probably a net negative. It's because of just letting some of these scrubs go, like Tanner Glass and Derek Englund.
That was just a bottom six abomination for the ages. It really was.
Hey, I want to ask you. You sort of mentioned before you were talking about maybe will people, will more players hit the free agent market, and it doesn't really it hasn't happened in hockey in a while where a true megastar hits the unrestricted free agent market. What do you think of Subban's $9 million a year contract with Montreal?
I thought it was pretty funny. I mean, you go into arbitration and the player is setting the ceiling purportedly of $8.5 million a year, and you're lowballing at $5.5, and then you sign into a $9 million a year extension. It's just sort of bizarre how that all unfolded. I think the guy's worth it. I really do. I think that if you get an elite Norris Trophy level talent, which I think Subban definitely is, then he's worth that amount of money.
Yeah, it's just a lot of money. It's a lot of money for this coming season.
It is. But,
it doesn't give you a lot of flexibility. I think. It's a gamble. It's a gamble that the cap's going to go up. I think as it currently is, if the cap was frozen at its level today, I think it's probably a slight bit too high. But the cap's obviously going to go up. So.
But don't you think it's just strange that Subban's camp set the $8.5 million figure for the arbitrator, and then they signed him for more.
Well, wasn't that only going to be for 1 year though? The 8.5.
1 or 2 years, but
so he so he must have been figuring that had he gone to the UFA market, he would have got 10 over 10.
I'm sure he could have. I just think that it was crazy that they let it get to that point. I have to think that. I mean, it goes without saying that if they would have avoided the bridge contract and just signed him to a long-term extension, they'd probably be paying him $6.5 million a year. It would have saved themselves a ton of money.
Well,
but
I think go ahead.
Even before they got into discussions about arbitration, they probably would have signed him to less money than that.
Right. The counter to the bridge contract thing, because I heard a lot of people sort of saying that they should have signed him a couple years ago, and I think they definitely should have. But I do think there's another way to look at it, which is that they could have had him now for $6 million and had an extra $3 million to spend. The last 2 years, you had him for a huge discount from what he was worth. And they got to the Eastern Conference Finals because they were able to have a bunch of they were able to have 8 forwards who made over $3 million because they were saving a little bit on the Subban contract. So, I think when we judge whether they should have given him the bridge contract or not, I think we have to remember the last couple of years when they had a pretty good team.
Yeah, I have no problem with them not signing him to a long-term extension a couple of years ago. It's perfectly reasonable to see how things play out.
And he was pretty enigmatic. I mean, he had his really bad moments a couple years ago too. It wasn't a guarantee that he was going to be the player he was in the playoffs this year.
Yeah, the thing that I think is a little bit objectionable if you're assessing their performance as a management team is letting it get to a point where you submit a $5.5 million a year figure to the arbitrator, which is just it's laughable.
Right.
And all of a sudden you're in a position where your superstar player resents you and you feel the need to go above and beyond the figure that he gave to the arbitrator and give him 8 years. It just seems like that could have all been avoided. Give him a nice, reasonable, 7.75 deal.
Yeah, they should have matched. They should have matched Shea Weber's deal.
Right,
Or
exactly.
done that one thing where like you give him $1 more so he can say he's the highest paid defenseman.
Exactly. They let it go too long.
Do you think in the NHL though that any player is worth the max, 20% of the cap max? Like, do you think so? It's if Crosby was an unrestricted free agent, could he get the maximum contract, and would he be worth it?
I don't think that if I were building a team that I would give anybody the max. But I think that it's at least debatable because we're seeing. This summer is a great example of it. We're seeing a great divide between the haves and the have-nots, superstars, and the bottom sixers. The fact that you can get guys at the end of free agency for $1 million, when the cap goes up to, it's going to get close to $80 million over the next couple of years. If you can get bottom six guys for $1 million, then I think there's an argument to be made that you can pay like truly elite talent $12 million a year, $13 million.
See, I just think that talent would have to be so good. Like, I think to make it worth it, it would have to be a player. It would have to be someone better than Crosby, or at least as good as Crosby.
Yeah, I think that's right. You can't make a mistake. They have to be so obviously at the top of the league. That there's no doubt about it.
Right, because I think that people talk all the time. I think we've talked about it before that one great player in hockey has like half, I'd say a quarter of the impact of a great player on a basketball team. But the other way to look, I think the other way to say that is like a guy taking up 20% of the hockey salary cap, who can only play like 1/3 of the game, like you're taking a lot of money from a lot of other people. And you're not, you are going to be the target of all criticism if you took the maximum contract. Whereas in basketball, you can take the maximum contract, and if you're good enough, you can carry the team by yourself.
It's a big difference.
It's a huge difference. And I think if Crosby was making like $14 million this year or something, or whatever it is, and we had to go through the Pens lineup and chop off, $5.5 million of salary from other people, the team would not be nearly as competitive. It just wouldn't be very good. It's like as good as Crosby is, he wouldn't be worth it.
And you're going to see a lot more, I think, of guys on entry-level contracts like Casper and Kapanen. You're going to see GMs feeling a lot more pressure to get guys that can play right away like that, so they can get them in cheap and have high-end complementary talent for cheap.
And you're going to see, I think, a lot of what the Oilers did with all those guys is instead of the 1 or 2 year bridge contract, you're just going to give everyone $6 or $7 million.
Yeah.
If you have a high first round pick who looks like a good player, you give him 6 years, $6 million right away.
Yeah, listen, the Oilers are due a lot of criticism for the way they built that team. But one thing that I can't quibble with is giving Taylor Hall and Jordan Eberle $6 million a year contract. I mean, I think that was good business.
Yeah, they have a bad team, but they don't have really that many bad contracts, which is kind of a weird thing. But
they just haven't gotten. They haven't filled out their roster. They have no centers.
Well, that's where we should have traded Brandon Sutter. I mean, that's that ship is sailed, but that would have been the ideal destination for him.
Still could happen. I wouldn't want him as my second line center. That's what he would probably be there.
Yeah. Shit, what was I going to ask you? Damn it. I just forgot. What do you want to talk about?
That's okay. Should we talk about the Steelers at all?
Sure. Yeah. What do you think about the Steelers? How's training camp going? Have you been following?
I haven't really followed it. You sent me a great picture of Ben the other day, leading his men, looking confused.
all sweaty and gross.
A little bit angry. With the Steelers at this point, I'm just looking forward to hearing from Ben.
That's all that matters. I mean, what else is there from training camp at this point? Like, as soon as we stopped getting the Casey Hampton run test, there's just nothing that's been as interesting from training camp since that.
There's nothing that's really that much fun.
Other than Ben chronicling the bond that he forms with his men.
The NFL, the only thing that keeps me interested in the Steelers are Ben and monitoring his quotes in fantasy football. I have to say there's nothing else.
So let's talk about fantasy football, because you and I are in a league together. No one in the league knows who you are except for me, and like one or two other people have heard of you.
You could always introduce me. You could always be okay.
Well, I don't know half these guys, but so I think that in fantasy football, you should do weekly payouts of a very small amount of money to the team with the highest points in that particular week. Because, like you just said, NFL football is not that interesting unless you have a stake in the game. And I think the more things you can do to give yourself a stake in the game, the better. That's the only way it's going to be interesting. So, like, if you go into a Monday night game and you're up by 50 points on a team you're playing that week in your fantasy league, but you're tied basically with somebody else for the most points in the league for the week, then maybe you have a stake in the Monday night game. What are your thoughts on weekly payouts?
I don't really care. It's like there was. You don't
come on this podcast and not have an opinion. Take a stand. People don't want wishy-washy. They don't want this.
All right, I'll take a stand. I don't want weekly payouts. Just like everyone else in the league except you. I don't want weekly payouts. You know what was the most tedious debate of the week in our fantasy football league? What are we gonna give for points per reception? 0.25 points or 0.5 points? That was like a long-running debate this week. I just over football. There's something about hockey that just captures my imagination. It's been unrelenting for the last 35 years of my life. I've been interested in it. Everything else, sort of comes and goes, and just there comes a point where I'm not interested anymore, including football. The thing I love about hockey is it never wanes. My interest never wanes.
Football to me is like it's just a craps table at this point. Like it's all about the gambling.
It's gambling. That's right.
But having said that, it is the perfect gambling sport. Whether it's fantasy or point spreads or over-unders or stuff like that. So I don't think that the games need to necessarily be that exciting as long as it's structured in a way that it's just so ideal for gambling.
Yeah, it's great for gambling, and it's great to get on your high horse and talk about how absolutely morally reprehensible the league is for not suspending Ray Rice or suspending Josh Gordon, whatever. It's just a disgraceful institution in the NFL, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know. Like at some point, I don't know how much to blame the NFL or just the players, or like whether football just sort of attracts a certain people that just seem like bad people in a lot of cases. Like I don't know where the league's responsibility and the players' individual responsibility meshes. I mean, the leagues can certainly do more, but like a lot of these players come into the league real damaged before they even get to the NFL. I don't know what to make of it. I mean, I don't think I don't really like any football players. I don't really care for the league all that much.
The NFL is just horrible.
I just like gambling on it.
I just noticed we got a comment on like a years old post. Remember we had posts on Real Housewives?
We did. We tried to do that one.
Yeah, somebody just left a comment, like a serious comment.
I see that. What
is that all about?
I know that's real. That's a real comment.
It's a real comment. Is that bizarre or what?
Should we respond?
I think so.
That was like the stupidest experiment we've ever tried. That lasted I think we made it to the first commercial break.
Yeah, that was bad. So are we going to do The Bachelor this year?
I don't know. It's not until January. We don't have to decide.
Who is The Bachelor? Did they announced it?
Yeah, I heard. Well, I heard that it's Ari.
Who's Ari? Ari, the race car driver?
The race car driver, yeah.
Ooh, intriguing.
He could be a good one.
Yeah, I'm on board.
We missed this one, and I got a lot of The Bachelorette. Well, The Bachelorette had just ended, and we didn't watch it this season. And after the last episode, the next day, I got a lot of people commenting like, "Oh, I wish you guys had done this season. Did you see after the final rose, where the guy said that they had sex in the fantasy suite?"
Yeah.
And I was, I said to people, I said, "Look, that's not in the four walls of the show. I wouldn't have heard that. Right. That wouldn't have been part of what we talked about."
You don't watch after the finals.
No, we don't watch after the finals. Mostly, I say it's on principle, but mostly it's because we just want to get it over with. We don't want to stay up till 11 o'clock before we podcast.
The reason I'm on board for next season of The Bachelor is because I end up having to watch the stuff anyway. Mrs. Artistry was absolutely committed. She thought it was really a travesty that we missed the season. She thought it was great.
She thought it was a great season?
She thought it was great, and she watched Hometowns and the finale, and I ended up having to sit there for that. So might as well podcast about it.
I did feel bad about not, helping people through Hometowns.
Yeah, they need you.
They need us. I felt like I could sense there were a lot of lost souls out there.
Yeah,
and wondering why, what is this guy doing in Charlotte? Was that a blessing? Was that not a blessing? I mean,
they're looking for comfort. Yeah,
that's a huge factor. I mean, did people out there know whether a blessing was given?
Listen, some people are born with great responsibility, and we're among those people. Some people can skate through life without contributing much to society, but we have a calling, and I think we have to answer it.
First paragraph of our obituary, going to say we were the arbiters of the blessing.
Yeah, that's a very enigmatic thing to have on your tombstone. You could do worse. I mean, to be the arbiters of the blessing, if they think we're rabbis or something, whatever they think, they're going to think we were important in some way.
That's right. Are there any other sports stuff you want to talk about? What about Brett Kiesel? Are the Steelers going to re-sign him? What do you think? Key.
Well, I think it's the kind of thing where you want to re-sign him in some capacity. You want to, he could be your towel boy. He could be your, pep talker on the side. You want him around. You want Key around.
He could, organize the hard hats and the lunch pails on the sideline.
Yeah, whatever you need Key to do, Key will do. He just wants to be with the men.
Do you think the Steelers are going to be good? We're going to do our official weekly pick game podcast where we go through the schedule. We'll do that later this month. But what do you think about the Steelers going to be good, better, worse?
I need to see a little bit of preseason action. I need to see some of these young receivers that are backing up AB, Wheaton. I need to see a little bit of these rookies on defense, and then I'll give you my assessment, all in due time, my friend.
That's the big thing. I think the Steelers are going to be good, better than last year, but they're one AB injury away from not being better than last year.
Yeah, if AB goes down, who's stepping in? MW? JB? LM?
Yeah, LM isn't going to step in.
Yeah, you got to be realistic.
Yeah, you got Dre. You can throw the screen to Dre, whatever.
Dry.
Who's the running back? What's his face? I forget his name.
Le'Veon.
Yeah, you got Lay.
Well, Veon. What's
Veon.
really mysterious to me is why Le'Veon reportedly has dropped 20 pounds. Why did Le'Veon feel like he needed to drop all that weight?
I heard some stories that Ben is in the best shape of his career.
Yeah. Oh,
we've been hearing that though for the last several years.
What do you think about Manny Sanders throwing Ben under the bus?
Yeah, I was a little shocked by that. You don't throw Ben under the bus. I just don't think you do that to Ben.
What was UL thinking about that?
Would Ben throw Manny under the bus?
I don't think so.
And Young Money isn't what it used to be. But did he really throw him under the bus, or was he throwing Peyton Manning over the bus?
He was hoisting Peyton Manning on top of the bus.
Yeah, you could say that. I don't think it wasn't as much of a shot at Ben as it was at oh wow, we have a quarterback who's can actually complete sentences and isn't a total buffoon in the locker room.
It's not really a fair comparison.
No, when you're talking about a guy who seems like he knows what he's doing and can sort of, intellectually approach the game of football, there's
his mental reps are a little bit different than Ben's mental reps.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah, I think Peyton puts in a lot more mental reps than Ben does.
All right. Good talk. We'll come back. We'll do our Steelers preseason predictions, and if anything else happens with the Penguins, we'll talk about that too. Until next time, thanks for joining us, GTOG.